The Duggar family had been well known for a long time. Their large clan was portrayed on reality TV as the epitome of rigid morals, unshakable faith, and meticulously maintained tradition. 19 children raised in a system of discipline and dedication. Their lives broadcast as a model of traditional family living, and they were the epitome of oneness to the outside world. The Duggar household was a stronghold of regulations beneath its well-preserved exterior. Every youngster was expected to follow the predetermined course. Every decision was examined, and every relationship was watched. Marriages were approvals rather than choices, courtships were contracts rather than romances, and family order frequently came at the expense of uniqueness. In this setting, Johannah Duggar was raised by siblings who had already followed the road of obedience. She was supposed to follow suit and keep silent in the Duggar manner. All right, guys, buckle up, because today we're diving into one of the most jaw-dropping Duggar family stories yet. Johannah Duggar, yes, the sweet, quiet daughter we've watched grow up on 19 Kids and counting, has just flipped the script on everything we thought we knew about the Duggar household. And trust me, this one's got love, rebellion, and a whole lot of family drama. However, there were hints of a spark in her even as a little girl, a subtle disobedience that suggested she could one day question the legacy she had received. This was Johannah's world, a control-based family empire, a flawless public persona, and a daughter who secretly wondered if freedom and love could ever coexist under the Duggar name. One of the more reserved members of the large Duggar family for many years has been Johannah Duggar. She remained in the background, surrounded by siblings who frequently took center stage, and her life was shaped by the same strict rules that applied to all of them. But something started to change as she got older. Johannah was no longer satisfied with merely acting out the parts that had been written for her. She began to exhibit moments of independence, making minor decisions that suggested a more profound yearning to define her own identity. The way she handled herself, the assurance in her voice, and the quiet resolve in her eyes were all subtle changes that fans noted. It was hard to overlook Johannah's growing personality in a household where uniqueness was frequently repressed. There was a strength in her presence, a subtle defiance that suggested she would one day break free from the Duggar mold, even though she wasn't outspoken or rebellious in the conventional sense. At this point, Johannah started to gain attention as a young woman prepared to push the limits of her world, rather than merely as another Duggar daughter. Additionally, the seeds of revolt had already been sown, even if her family was unaware of it at the time. During this time of silent change, Johannah got to know Zach. He wasn't a member of the Duggar family, nor was he someone her parents personally selected or approved of. He was just himself, sincere, compassionate, and not scared to perceive Johannah as more than another daughter of the Duggar family. They clicked right away. Zach was a symbol of choice, something Johannah had never really known before. With him, the burden of expectation seemed to be lifted. Laughter came naturally, and talks flowed effortlessly. He saw her as a young lady with aspirations, feelings, and a voice of her own rather than as a part of a family empire. Johannah became increasingly aware of how different life could be outside of the Duggar restrictions as they spent more time together. Zach provided her the confidence to envision a future formed by love rather than authority, supported her freedom, and valued her viewpoints. Zach was the spark of rebellion in a home where every interaction was watched and every step toward marriage was prescribed. He was more than simply Johannah's boyfriend. He was the person who gave her the confidence to go beyond the bounds of her family's tradition and the emblem of her awakening. At last, the stress that had been rising inside Johannah became unbearable. She was no longer able to conceal her emotions or act as though she was going down the route her family had planned for her. She stood in front of her parents and siblings one evening, her voice shaking and her pulse racing, and she said the words that would change everything. "Zach is really special to me. I'd like to wed him." There was silence in the room. Johannah's announcement was blatantly disobedient in a household where marriage required parental approval and courtship was meticulously planned. In addition to love, her comments expressed rebellion, a rejection to allow standards she no longer adhered to determine her future. This confession was liberating for Johannah. That's when she decided to be honest instead of following orders and to be brave instead of afraid. However, it was a shock to her family. Never before had the Duggar household, which was based on tradition and control, seen such overt opposition from one of its own members. Johannah's entire world changed in that moment. There was no going back now that she had spoken her truth. The conflict between loyalty and love had already started. The Duggar household was in disarray the instant Johannah proclaimed her love for Zach. The matriarch of the family, Michelle Duggar, responded with prompt and unyielding control. For Michelle, Johannah's declaration went beyond romanticism and directly contradicted the principles she had upheld for decades. Michelle's tone was uncompromising, and her voice sounded forceful. She informed Johannah that she would never marry Zach. There would be no opportunity for compromise, no blessing, and no approval. According to Michelle, Johannah's wish to wed Zach was blatantly rebellious, as he was not a part of the Duggar scheme. The message was unambiguous: follow the family's rules or suffer the repercussions of disobedience. Johannah was supposed to show her devotion to the Duggar family, give up her emotions, and follow the road that was set for her. However, Johannah felt the pressure of her mother's authority mounting more strongly than before as Michelle's remarks reverberated throughout the space. She understood for the first time that obedience and love were incompatible. She would have to decide between her own heart and her family's acceptance. The Duggar family did not remain silent about Johannah's audacious admission for very long. Soon after, rumors began to circulate, and the public learned about her love for Zach and Michelle's opposition to their marriage. Fans who had spent years following the family were taken aback. Social media was ablaze with arguments. Johannah was hailed by some for her bravery and for being the first Duggar daughter to genuinely advocate for herself. They saw her as a beacon of independence in a controlling family and respected her determination to risk all for love. But some were concerned about the consequences. They wondered if Johannah's decision would cause her to become estranged from her siblings, or if the rigid morals of the family would break her heart. The Duggar fan base split into two groups: those who supported Johannah's uprising and others who were afraid of what might happen if they disobeyed Michelle. Online forums erupted in conjecture. YouTube pundits analyzed every aspect of the developing drama, and hashtags started to gain popularity. The response was tremendous for Johannah. She had not only put her family to the test, but she had also sparked a controversy among the people who had grown up with her. As spectators watched to see if she would comply with her mother's demand or stick to her defiant course, the strain increased with each day that went by. Johannah realized she was at her breaking point when Michelle's ultimatum hung over her. She had to decide whether to give in to her family's influence or take charge of her own destiny. She then secretly started to organize what would turn out to be the most audacious thing she had ever done. It was necessary to conceal every detail. In a home where privacy was practically non-existent, Johannah and Zach discussed their intentions in private, being cautious not to leave any evidence that might be found out. They talked about rings, vows, and a ritual that would only be theirs. The secrecy was both exciting and terrifying to Johannah, who saw every move as a defiance of the laws she had been up with. Her anchor was Zach. When uncertainty began to creep in, he reminded her that love was worth the chance. Together, they planned a wedding that would represent Johannah's liberation as well as their union, defying the Duggar system. The preparation was a precarious balancing act between fear and hope. Johannah was determined to show that her emotions could not be hushed, even though one mistake may reveal all. The plan for a covert wedding started to take shape in the shadow of her family's prying eyes. The Duggar home had turned into an emotional war. The atmosphere was tense after Johannah's confession and Michelle's demand, and every discussion seemed to turn into an argument. Whispered disagreements and hidden resentment now weighed heavily on the walls that had once reverberated with routine and order. Johannah felt imprisoned because everyone was watching her every action and questioning everything she said. She was under more pressure than ever to comply. But Zach's presence gave her courage. He reminded her that choosing her own path was not betrayal, but rather survival, and that love was not a crime. His support turned into her lifeline, a calm voice amidst the chaos. But Michelle became more determined. She saw Johannah's disobedience as a danger to the foundation of the family. She tightened her hold, demanding that customs be adhered to and that rules be respected. The mother-daughter conflict intensified, with each encounter leaving irreversible scars. Johannah's realization that she could no longer live in silence was the tipping point. The stifling control, the demands, and the disputes were all too much. She was on the brink of making a decision that would permanently change her life. Follow the Duggar way or venture into the unknown with Zach. Johannah understood what she was going to do at that very moment. There was an unmatched weight on the morning of Johannah's covert wedding. While Johannah discreetly got ready for the most audacious move of her life, the Duggar household continued with its daily activities. The time had come after every detail had been meticulously concealed and every plan had been whispered in secret. There were no cameras, no ceremony sanctioned by Duggar, and no parental blessings. Rather, Johannah and Zach stood together in a small, intimate group of people who genuinely agreed with her decision. The moment was all the more potent because it was so simple. For Johannah, this was about freedom rather than show. Her voice was full of rebellion and passion as she said her vows. With every statement, she declared that she would no longer be constrained by laws that prevented her from being happy. Far away from the Duggar limelight, Zach's eyes met hers with steadfast adoration, and they cemented their pledge with a gentle kiss. Johannah felt the bonds of control dissolve in that moment. She was now a wife and a woman who had made her own decisions, not merely a daughter in a family business. More than just a partnership, the covert marriage was a revolution, and a pivotal moment that would permanently change her life. The secret could not remain a secret indefinitely. Johannah knew she would have to face her family after the rings were exchanged and the vows were said. She felt a lot of pressure from her choice, yet she had the strength to speak up because of her love for Zach. The Duggar home burst in shock when Michelle eventually told them the truth. Johannah declared that she was already married as she stood in front of them, her pulse pounding but her voice firm. The whole basis of the family's order was shaken by the words, which hung in the air like thunder. The room was filled with gasps. Michelle's face hardened with rage, as several siblings turned away in silence and looked in shock. Johannah's covert marriage was more than just a rebellion for a family that valued tradition and authority. It was a direct threat to all they held dear. The household's peace was shattered by the announcement. Johannah found herself in the middle of a maelstrom she had caused as tears, rage, and bewilderment swirled together. Nevertheless, she experienced an odd sensation of calm in spite of the mayhem. Now that the truth was out, she had made her decision. There was no turning back now that Johannah had exceeded the boundary her family had established. Michelle Duggar lost her cool when Johannah disclosed her secret marriage. She had been the steadfast matriarch for years, the defender of the customs and laws that characterized the Duggar home. Michelle's rage, however, was more intense than ever as she stood in front of her daughter, who had defied everything. Sharp and forceful, her voice rang out like a warning bell throughout the home. For Michelle, Johannah's choice amounted to betrayal as much as disobedience. She believed that the marriage was a reckless move that compromised the principles she had battled to uphold and a stain on the family's reputation. Johannah's eyes filled with tears, but she refused to give up. Johannah was reminded that she was no longer alone by Zach, who stood silently but steadily next to her. But Michelle's rage was unrelenting. She talked of dishonor, shame, and the perils of deviating from the path. Every phrase was intended to weaken Johannah's determination and entice her to return to obedience. However, Johannah had gone too far, and there was no turning back. The family was left uncertain and shattered as Michelle's rage only served to widen the gap between mother and daughter. Once unified under Michelle's leadership, the Duggar household was now shaking from disobedience. The Duggar family was shocked by Johannah's covert marriage, but the biggest rifts started to appear among her siblings. They had been united for years by common norms and standards, and they were all brought up to respect the same principles. Now that Johannah had made his decision, they had to face their true allegiances. Her bravery was quietly and carefully praised by several of her siblings. They perceived in Johannah's choice a mirror of their own latent uncertainties, a glimmer of autonomy they had never ventured to pursue for themselves. Their hushed words of encouragement gave Johannah courage in the shadows, even though they were unable to publicly oppose Michelle. Others, on the other hand, strongly supported their mother. Johannah's marriage was viewed by them as risky and a violation of the family's unity. They talked about honor, obedience, and the perils of deviating from the road. Johannah was caught between her love for her siblings and the fact that her decision had caused them to part ways after their harsh criticism. Once portrayed as one cohesive, unbroken family, the Duggars now stood apart. A boundary between those who yearned for freedom and those who adhered to tradition was established by Johannah's insurrection and could not be removed. The suspense increased as everyone worried what would happen next in the quiet of the home. Fans' response to Johannah's covert marriage was swift and intense. Viewers who had grown up watching the Duggar family on reality television had long been fascinated by them and had analyzed every action they took. The audience had never witnessed a Duggar child publicly escaping before, thanks to Johannah's audacious resistance. Divergent voices erupted on social media. Some supporters came together to support Johannah, applauding her bravery and her choice to follow her heart. They viewed her as a young lady who dared to cross the strict confines of her upbringing and as a symbol of independence. Supporters flooded timelines with encouraging remarks using hashtags like #TeamJohannah and #LoveOverRules. However, not everyone supported her. Her acts were denounced by other fans who were devoted to the Duggar legacy. They charged her with disrespecting her parents, damaging the family's name, and abandoning the principles that had guided the household for many years. There were intense discussions on internet forums, with each side vehemently supporting their position on Johannah's decision. Johannah became a topic of conversation as the outrage and support clashed in a whirlwind of criticism. For the first time, she was more than just a daughter of a well-known family. She was a contentious figure, a symbol of defiance, and a warning that love might lead to revolution even in the Duggar Empire. Johannah's world changed in the days after her covert wedding. For the first time, she awoke every morning as a wife with the freedom to direct her own life, rather than as a daughter constrained by her family's norms. Though the shadow of her family's disapproval remained, Johannah experienced a power she had never known before as the peaceful delight of independence replaced the hush of secrecy. Zach's life was straightforward, yet it had a depth Johannah had long desired. Together, they established rituals that included eating meals together, whispering dreams, and making plans for their own future. Because it was theirs, every moment, no matter how commonplace, felt exceptional. However, independence had its drawbacks. Johannah was aware that her decision had left the Duggar household shattered, and that the scars might never fully heal. Unable to reconcile her disobedience with their commitment to Michelle, some siblings distanced themselves from her, while others extended cautious support. The ongoing tension served as a reminder that love had a price. Johannah pushed on nonetheless. Determined to show that happiness could be found outside of the Duggar mold, she accepted the life she had chosen. More than just a partnership, her marriage to Zach was a statement of her independence and her resolve to stop living in silence. Johannah took with her the indisputable fact that she had finally chosen herself by choosing love, despite the unknown future. Johannah's decision to wed Zach behind closed doors was more than just a romantic gesture. It marked a sea change in the Duggar narrative. The family had long been seen as a model of rigid obedience, and their kids were expected to walk the same tightrope. However, Johannah's disobedience left a fresh legacy that would never be forgotten. Her disobedience reverberated well beyond her family's house. She became a warning to some, evidence of what occurs when customs are broken. She was a young woman who dared to assert her own happiness in the face of tremendous pressure, and to others, she was a light of courage. The Duggar family would never be the same again. The memory of Johannah's decision was now held by siblings, serving as a reminder that even in a society that was based on control, independence was achievable. Fans will also recall her as the daughter who stood up, spoke up, and lived fearlessly, rather than as the quiet one who melted into the background. Johannah's covert wedding was a declaration rather than just a scandal, a proclamation that one voice may alter everything. Even within the most rigid of traditions, that love cannot be controlled and that originality cannot be suppressed. Her story thus ended in defiance rather than submission, leaving a legacy of disobedience that would endure long after the vows were exchanged. If you are looking for more Duggar family exclusive gossip, come back to Vogue TV for all your updates. Bye, guys.